On the morning of my induction day, exactly 39 weeks and 2 days into my pregnancy, I watched my husband transfer $47,500 out of our joint account while he thought I was asleep. He did it slowly, calmly, like someone watering plants. That was the moment I understood something was already over and something much colder had begun. If you've ever sensed betrayal before, you could prove it. You know that hollow, sinking quiet inside your chest. If this story resonates with you, take a second to like the video and tell me in the comments, have you ever realized the truth at the worst possible moment of your life? Because I didn't confront him that morning. I smiled. I packed my hospital bag, and I pretended I hadn't seen a single thing. My name is Danielle Carter. I was 31 years old at the time, living in Phoenix, Arizona, working as a licensed escrow officer, the kind of job where you spend your days watching people sign papers that determine who owns what, who gets paid, and who walks away empty-handed. Ironically, I should have recognized the signs sooner, but betrayal is rarely loud. It usually whispers first. My husband's full name is Eric Thomas Carter. He was 35, then a regional sales manager for a solar equipment distributor. Charming, confident, the kind of man who knew exactly what to say in a room to make people feel safe around him. That's how he convinced me to marry him after just 18 months. That's how he convinced me to put his name on the house. And that's how he convinced me for nearly 4 years that we were building a life together. Until the morning our son was about to be born. At 6:12 a.m., I woke up because the mattress shifted. Eric was sitting at the edge of the bed with his back toward me, shoulders slightly hunched, the glow of his laptop screen lighting the side of his face. He thought I was asleep because I had taken a prescribed sleep aid the night before, something my OB had recommended since my anxiety had been high. But pregnancy changes your sleep patterns. I had only been pretending to rest. Through my half-closed eyes, I saw the Wells Fargo login screen. Then I saw our joint account balance drop, $89,203. Then click, $41,703. Transfer completed, he exhaled. Not the kind of exhale someone makes when paying a bill. It sounded like relief, like someone escaping. My heart didn't race. That's the strange part. It went very, very still. He closed the laptop quietly, stood up, and turned to look at me. I kept my breathing slow and even. He watched me for a few seconds, checking. Then he walked into the bathroom. The shower started, and I stared at the ceiling while something cold and sharp slid into place inside my mind. Because that wasn't a random transfer. That number, $47,500, was almost exactly half of what remained from my inheritance. 2 years earlier, when my mother died, I had received $102,000 from the sale of her condo. Eric had insisted we put it into our joint account for transparency. He said marriage meant no secrets. At the time, I believed him. Now lying there with my hands resting on my 9-month pregnant stomach, I realized something with perfect clarity. He wasn't moving money. He was moving himself out of our life. Have you ever had that moment where you suddenly see the pattern backward? Every strange behavior suddenly making sense all at once. If you have, tell me, what was the first clue you ignored? For me, the clues had been small. The late sales dinners, the way he had started locking his phone around month 7 of my pregnancy, the time he casually asked if my inheritance had any legal restrictions. At the time, I thought he was just stressed. Men sometimes pull away when they feel unprepared to become fathers. That's what I told myself. That morning, I knew better. The shower turned off. I quickly closed my eyes. He came back into the bedroom, smelling of soap, and leaned down to kiss my forehead. "Big day," he whispered softly. His voice sounded gentle, almost loving. I nearly laughed. Instead, I smiled when I woke up. "Big day," I echoed. He helped me sit up, his hand warm on my back, And for a moment, if I hadn't seen the transfer, I might have believed everything was normal. But here's something you learn working in escrow. The most dangerous lies are the ones wrapped in routine. We left for St. Joseph's Hospital at 7:30 a.m. During the drive, he held my hand at every red light. He talked about baby names. He joked nervously about changing diapers. He looked exactly like an excited, soon-to-be father. And if that had been all I knew, I would have trusted him completely. But in my mind, numbers kept replaying like a ticker. $47, $500. Half. Calculated. Intentional. At 9:14 a.m., as we checked in at Labor and Delivery, his phone buzzed. He pulled it out quickly, tilting the screen away from me. But not fast enough. I saw a name, not a contact I recognized. It wasn't saved as mom or work or any neutral label. It was saved simply as Lena, don't answer, and beneath it, a text preview appeared. Did you move it yet? My stomach tightened, not from labor contractions, from something deeper, something instinctive, something that told me the money transfer was only the surface. There was a larger truth underneath, and I didn't know yet how deep it went. Labor officially started at 10:03 a.m., but the real pain didn't come from the contractions. It came from watching my husband move through the room like a man rehearsing a role he had already decided to quit. If you've ever been in a hospital delivery room, you know how intimate and exposed it feels. The bright overhead lights, the constant beeping monitors, nurses coming and going like clockwork, asking deeply personal questions as if they're reading a checklist. Eric played his part perfectly. He rubbed my back when the contractions tightened. He held the plastic cup of ice chips to my lips. He spoke in a low, reassuring voice every time I flinched. Breathe, Danny. You're doing amazing. Anyone looking at us would have seen a devoted husband. But once you see the crack, you can't unsee it. Every time his phone vibrated, his jaw tightened, almost imperceptibly. Every time a nurse entered, he subtly turned the screen face down. And every time he thought I wasn't looking, he checked the time, like he had somewhere else to be. At 11:27 a.m., during a quiet lull between contractions, he stepped out to grab coffee. The door clicked shut behind him. I waited exactly 10 seconds. Then I reached for his phone. Now, before anyone judges me, ask yourself honestly, what would you have done in that moment? Would you have trusted blindly, or would you have wanted the truth, no matter how much it hurt? My hands were shaking, but not from fear, from certainty, because deep down, I already knew what I was going to find. His phone wasn't locked. That told me something immediately. Eric had always been meticulous about privacy, which meant one of two things. Either he had gotten careless, or he believed I was too vulnerable to check. Both possibilities told me the same thing. He had already written me out of the equation. I opened the messages. The contact, Lena, don't answer, was at the top. The thread stretched back months. My throat tightened as I scrolled. Lena, did you talk to her about separating finances yet? Eric, not until after the baby. Timing matters. Lena, you promised this would be clean. Eric, it will be. I just need her inheritance secured first. The room felt suddenly smaller. The monitor beside me kept beeping, steadily proof that my heart was still beating, even though it felt like it had stopped. I kept scrolling. Lena, I'm not waiting forever, Eric. You said we'd have the house by fall. Eric, relax. The Phoenix property is in both our names. Once the funds are moved, it's simple. My stomach twisted. Our house, the one I had paid the entire down payment on, the one we bought with my mother's inheritance. He had never said our home in those texts. He called it a property, like an asset, like something already slated for liquidation. Then came the message that made everything inside me go cold. Eric, after she delivers, she'll be too overwhelmed to fight anything. That's when I'll file. Time seemed to slow. I read that sentence 3 times. After she delivers, too overwhelmed. That's when I'll file. I felt something shift inside me. Not physically, but emotionally. It wasn't heartbreak. It wasn't rage. It was clarity. Pure surgical clarity. There's a moment in betrayal when pain burns itself out and leaves behind something quieter, something sharper. That moment had arrived. The door opened. I set the phone down instantly. Eric walked back in, holding 2 coffees, smiling like nothing in the world was wrong. "Miss me," he joked. I looked at him, really looked, and for the first time, I saw him not as my husband, but as a stranger, carefully managing a transaction. Because that's what I had become to him, a transaction, a timing issue, a source of funds. If you were in my place, what would you have done right then? Would you have confronted him immediately, thrown the phone at him, demanded answers in the middle of labor? Or would you have stayed silent? I chose silence, not because I was weak, because I understood something Eric didn't. Timing matters. That afternoon, labor intensified. By 3:40 p.m., the pain was relentless waves crashing over me without pause. Eric never left my side. He whispered encouragement. He wiped sweat from my forehead. He told the nurses how proud he was of me. He looked exactly like a loving partner. And maybe that was the most chilling part of all, because it meant he could perform affection without feeling it. At 6:12 p.m., after 14 hours of labor, our son was born, 7 pounds, 3 ounces. Dark hair, strong lungs. The nurse placed him on my chest, and for a moment, the world narrowed to that tiny, perfect face. Tears slid down my temples, not from grief, from something deeper, because in that moment, I realized something that changed everything. Eric wasn't just planning to leave me. He was planning to leave his own child's stability behind. And that meant one thing. He had already decided our son was collateral damage. That realization hardened something inside me permanently. Eric leaned over us, smiling broadly. "He's perfect," he said. His voice cracked just enough to sound sincere. But when I glanced at his phone on the bedside table, the screen lit up again. A new message from Lena. I saw just 4 words in the preview. "Is it done yet?" And underneath it, Eric typed his reply. I couldn't see the full sentence, only the first line. "Yes, phase 1 is phase 1. I didn't know what phase 2 was, but I knew one thing, with absolute certainty. I was no longer the only one being watched in this story. 3 days after giving birth at exactly 2:18 p.m. on a Tuesday afternoon, I watched my husband sign a temporary absence form at his office and list a woman named Lena Whitmore as his emergency contact. He didn't know I was sitting 10 feet away in the waiting area. He didn't know I had already seen everything. And he definitely didn't know I had stopped thinking of him as my husband. If you've ever discovered someone has quietly replaced you before you even knew the relationship was ending, you understand how surreal that moment feels. Tell me honestly, what hurts more, the betrayal itself, or realizing how long it was planned? For me, it wasn't pain anymore. It was calculation, because by then, I had decided something very simple. I would not confront Eric until I understood the entire plan. I needed to know every piece, every move, every lie. Only then would I decide how to respond. And that decision began the morning we left the hospital. Eric was attentive, almost excessively so. He carried the baby seat. He opened every door. He insisted on stopping to buy groceries, so I wouldn't have to worry. He played the role of devoted new father with such precision that if I hadn't read those messages, I would have believed him completely. But now, I noticed everything. The way he checked his phone every 6 minutes. The way he angled his body when texting. The way he spoke to me with a softness that felt rehearsed. At home, I moved slowly, physically exhausted, Stitch's aching body still recovering. But my mind had never been sharper, because working in escrow teaches you one critical skill. You learn to read what people do with their paperwork, not what they say. And Eric had left paperwork everywhere. That night, after he fell asleep on the couch, with the baby monitor beside him, I opened his laptop. I wasn't guessing anymore. I knew exactly where to look. Downloads folder. Most people never think to clear it. There it was, a PDF. File name property, underscore disclosure, underscore prelim, underscore Whitmore, underscore Carter. Whitmore. My chest tightened. I opened it. It was a preliminary disclosure form for a home purchase. Address Scottsdale, Arizona. Purchase price $612,000. Co-borrowers listed: Eric Thomas Carter, Lena Marie Whitmore. My hands went cold. This wasn't a fantasy affair. This wasn't just emotional cheating. This was logistical, financial, structured. They were buying a house together. And the loan application date, 5 months earlier, when I had been 4 months pregnant. I sat there staring at the screen while my newborn son slept quietly in the next room. That was when the betrayal moved from emotional to something deeper, something colder. Because this wasn't a sudden decision Eric made out of panic or fear. This was a long-term exit strategy, planned while he was still telling me he loved me, planned while he was painting the nursery, planned while he was feeling our baby kick under his hand. Have you ever realized someone was living 2 parallel lives right in front of you? If so, how long did it take before you trusted your instincts? For me, it took exactly one more document. Attached to the PDF was another file. Title separation, timeline draft. I opened it slowly. Inside was a detailed outline. Month 1, secure joint liquid funds. Month 2, file for legal separation, citing irreconcilable differences. Month 3, relocate to Scottsdale property. Month 4, begin custody negotiations. My vision blurred for a moment, but I forced myself to keep reading because the last line mattered most. Maintain cooperative tone to reduce financial liability. Reduce financial liability. That's how he described me. Not as a partner, not as the mother of his child, but as a liability. And that's when something shifted inside me, permanently. Not anger, not grief, something quieter. A boundary, a decision. Eric thought he was orchestrating a clean exit. He thought timing was on his side. He thought postpartum exhaustion would make me passive. What he didn't know was this: I spent my entire career protecting clients from exactly this kind of financial maneuvering. I knew every legal pressure point, every procedural delay, every documentation requirement. He was playing checkers, and he had just unknowingly handed a chess player his entire strategy. I closed the laptop quietly, walked into the nursery, and sat beside my sleeping son. His tiny chest rose and fell steadily. In that moment, I made a promise, not out loud, but with absolute certainty. Eric could leave me, but he would not walk away with the life he planned to build, using my money, my stability, and my silence. Because silence, when used correctly, is not weakness. It's leverage. The next morning, Eric kissed my forehead before leaving for work. "I'll be back early," he said warmly. "We'll talk about the future." I smiled softly. "Of course," I replied. He had no idea we would be talking about 2 very different futures. That afternoon, while organizing hospital paperwork, I noticed something I had overlooked before. A folded envelope tucked inside Eric's overnight bag. Not addressed, no return label, just a thick stack inside. I opened it, and what I found inside made my breath catch. Not from shock this time, but from something far more dangerous: understanding. Because it wasn't just bank records. It wasn't just loan documents. It was something much more serious. Something legal. Something that changed the stakes completely. And in that moment, I realized Eric's phase 2 wasn't just about leaving. It was about protecting himself from something he believed I would never discover. 2 weeks after my son was born, at exactly 8:41 p.m. on a Thursday night, I watched my husband rehearse a breakup speech in the mirror while holding a glass of $32 Cabernet he never planned to finish. He practiced the same line 5 times. "This isn't about you, Danielle. It's about what's healthiest for everyone." By the 6th repetition, his voice sounded smooth, convincing, almost compassionate. That was when I realized something chilling. He believed his own script. If you've ever seen someone prepare to betray you while acting like they're protecting you, you know how surreal it feels. Tell me, do you think people who betray like this feel guilt? Or do they rewrite the story until they believe they're the victim? Because Eric had already rewritten ours, and I was no longer his wife in that story. I was a transition, a phase, an obstacle to be handled cleanly. That night, I stayed upstairs in the nursery, rocking my son in the dim light, listening to Eric's footsteps pacing below. He thought I was asleep. He thought I was fragile. He thought I didn't know. What he didn't understand was this: silence is only weakness when you don't have information. And by then, I had more information than he could imagine. The envelope I found earlier that week had contained something far more serious than financial paperwork. Inside were copies of legal consultation notes. Eric had met with a family law attorney 3 months before our son was born. The notes were brutally direct. Client seeks expedited separation post-childbirth. Objective: minimize spousal support exposure. Strategy document: maternal emotional instability if necessary. That last line had made my stomach drop. Document maternal emotional instability. In other words, if needed, he was prepared to paint me as an unfit mother. I had sat at the kitchen table, reading that sentence over and over, while my newborn slept beside me. Not crying, not shaking, just absorbing. Because that single note revealed something deeper than betrayal. It revealed intent, calculated intent. Eric wasn't just planning to leave. He was preparing to control the narrative, to control custody, to control money, to control how others saw me. And that changed everything. Because now, this wasn't just about protecting my finances. It was about protecting my child. Have you ever had that moment when you realized someone wasn't just hurting you, they were preparing to erase you? What would you have done? That was the moment my silence became strategy. The next day, I called in sick to work officially for postpartum recovery. Unofficially, I began building documentation. Every text, every bank transfer, every legal note, every timeline detail. I created a digital folder titled simply Insurance, not Revenge, not Evidence. Insurance. Because in escrow, we never call it proof. We call it protection. Meanwhile, Eric continued acting like a devoted husband. He brought home groceries, cooked dinners, took selfies holding the baby, posted them on Facebook with captions like, "Proud dad life." Friends commented heart emojis. His mother called me daily, praising how supportive he was. And watching it all, I learned something uncomfortable. People believe what they're shown, not what's true. That's why documentation matters more than emotion. One evening, about 3 weeks postpartum, Eric sat beside me on the couch, unusually quiet. He didn't turn on the TV. He didn't check his phone. He just stared at his hands. "I've been thinking a lot," he finally said. His voice carried a rehearsed weight. I recognized it instantly. This was the speech he practiced in the mirror. Here it comes, I thought. The official beginning of phase 2. "I feel like we've grown apart," he continued carefully. "The stress, the baby, everything. Maybe we need some space to figure things out." I nodded slowly, not surprised, not emotional, just observing. "What kind of space?" I asked calmly. He hesitated. That hesitation told me everything. Because he wasn't expecting resistance. He was expecting tears, panic, desperation. Instead, he saw composure, and that unsettled him. "Maybe a temporary separation," he said finally. "Just until things settle." Temporary, another rehearsed word. He wanted it to sound gentle, non-threatening, manageable, but I knew the real timeline. Month 2, file for separation. Month 3, relocate. Month 4, custody negotiations. I looked at him quietly for a moment. Then I asked the question that made his eyes flicker for just half a second. "Have you already talked to a lawyer?" His breathing stalled, just briefly, but long enough. "No," he said quickly. "I mean, I've thought about it, but nothing serious." That was his first direct lie to my face, since I discovered everything. And something about hearing it spoken out loud made my decision even clearer, because it confirmed one thing. Eric was committed to the performance, which meant he would never expect what came next. I reached for his hand gently. "I think space might be good," I said softly. His head lifted in surprise. He hadn't expected agreement. "Really?" he asked. I nodded. "Yes, we both need to think clearly, especially for our son." Relief washed over his face, so visibly it was almost painful to watch. Because in that moment, he believed he had control. He believed his plan was working. He believed I was compliant. That belief would become his greatest mistake. Later that night, after he fell asleep, I opened my laptop again. Not to review documents, not to collect evidence, but to do something much more important. I scheduled a consultation with one of the most aggressive family law attorneys in Phoenix, an attorney known for one specific reputation. She didn't just defend clients. She dismantled strategic manipulation. Her name was Rachel Moreno, and her earliest available appointment was exactly 6 days away. What Eric didn't know was that by the time he officially filed anything, I would already be 10 steps ahead. Because phase 2 wasn't going to unfold the way he planned. Not anymore. And he had no idea how much the stakes were about to change. 6 days later, at exactly 9:02 a.m. on a Monday morning, I walked into a downtown Phoenix law office, carrying a diaper bag and a folder containing 173 pages of evidence my husband didn't know existed. I wasn't shaking. I wasn't crying. I was calm in the same way people are calm before signing life-altering contracts. Because that's exactly what this was. A negotiation for the future of my child's life. If you've ever sat across from someone who holds the power to completely change your situation, you know how heavy that silence feels. Tell me, do you think it's better to show strength immediately, or to let the other side underestimate you first? I had already chosen. Underestimation was my advantage. Rachel Moreno's office was minimalist and cold, floor-to-ceiling windows, steel shelving, a large oak desk with nothing personal on it except a single framed photo of 2 teenagers in graduation gowns. She stood when I entered. "Danielle Carter," she said, voice crisp. I nodded. "Sit," she replied simply. No small talk, no sympathy, just efficiency. I liked her immediately. Because people who fight professionally don't waste energy pretending to be comforting. They focus on outcomes. I handed her the folder. She didn't open it right away. Instead, she studied me. "You're 2 weeks postpartum," she said flatly. "Most people in your situation come in emotional and confused. You look like you already know what you want." "I do," I answered. "What do you want?" she asked. Not what happened, not how do you feel? Just the core question. I didn't hesitate. I want legal protection for my son. I want financial accountability. And I want to make sure he can't manipulate custody through false narratives. Rachel nodded once. "Good," she said. "Those are strategic goals, not emotional ones." Then she opened the folder. For the next 15 minutes, she read in complete silence. Bank transfer logs, loan application copies, attorney consultation notes, screenshots of text messages, the separation timeline draft. Her expression didn't change. But when she finished, she closed the folder slowly. "This is not a standard infidelity case," she said. "No," I replied quietly. "This is premeditated, financial, and custodial positioning." Her words felt clinical, precise, accurate, and hearing them spoken out loud confirmed something important. I wasn't imagining the scale of what Eric had done. Rachel leaned back. "He planned this for at least 5 months, she continued. Possibly longer. The good news is, he made several strategic mistakes. That was the first time I felt something like warmth inside my chest. Not relief, momentum. "What mistakes?" I asked. She tapped the folder. "First, transferring joint funds before filing separation creates documentation of intent to shield marital assets. Judges do not like that. She raised one finger. Second, his attorney notes about documenting your emotional instability are extremely dangerous for him if presented correctly. It shows bad faith preparation. Another finger. Third, he used marital funds to secure a property with another partner. That complicates asset division significantly. She paused, then looked directly at me. And fourth, he assumes you don't know. Her gaze sharpened slightly. That assumption gives us timing leverage. Timing. That word again. Everything in Eric's plan depended on timing. But now, for the first time, timing belonged to me. Have you ever realized the person trying to outmaneuver you actually handed you the advantage without knowing it? What would you do with that kind of leverage? I knew exactly what I would do. Don't confront him yet, Rachel said firmly, as if reading my thoughts. Let him believe his plan is intact. I plan to, I replied. She nodded approvingly. Good, because what we need now is documentation continuity. She explained it clearly. Over the next few weeks, I would maintain normal behavior. Allow him to continue financial movements. Allow him to continue communicating with Lena. Every action he took would deepen the legal pattern of intent. This is like building a case in layers, she said. We don't strike until the pattern is undeniable. Her words matched exactly how I had been thinking. Not revenge, structure, protection. Then she said something that shifted the stakes even further. There's one more issue, she added quietly. I waited. Rachel tapped the attorney notes again. If he attempts to build a narrative of maternal instability, he may try to provoke emotional reactions. He may document arguments. He may claim postpartum mental distress. A cold awareness spread through me, because that meant something simple. Eric might try to push me into looking unstable. You must remain controlled, Rachel continued. Every text you send, every conversation, everything must be neutral, factual, calm. I nodded slowly. I had already been doing that instinctively, but now it had legal significance. Rachel slid a business card across the desk. My office will file a preemptive financial preservation notice if he moves any additional funds, she said. But we will not file for separation yet. Why, I asked. Her answer was simple. Because right now, he thinks he's winning. She leaned forward slightly. Let him keep thinking that. Something inside me settled completely at that moment. Because for the first time since I saw that transfer at 6:12 a.m. weeks earlier, I knew with absolute certainty I was no longer reacting. I was preparing. As I stood to leave, Rachel added one final sentence. Danielle, when this surfaces publicly, it will not be quiet. Are you prepared for that? Publicly. The word echoed in my mind. I thought of Eric's family, our shared friends, his professional reputation, the image he carefully curated. And I answered honestly. I'm prepared for the truth, I said. Rachel nodded once. That's all you'll need. When I walked out of that office into the bright Arizona sunlight, my phone buzzed. A text from Eric. Just got approval on something big. We should celebrate tonight. Approval. My stomach tightened slightly because I knew exactly what he meant. But when I opened the message thread, I saw something new, something he had never done before. He had accidentally sent a screenshot instead of a normal text. A screenshot that revealed a conversation not with Lena, but with someone else, a name I had never seen. And the first line of that message changed everything. Once she signs the postnatal agreement, we're completely safe. 4 weeks after giving birth, at exactly 7:36 p.m. on a Friday night, my husband slid a legal document across the dining table and asked me to sign it while our newborn slept 10 feet away in his bassinet. He called it just a routine postnatal agreement. The document was 14 pages long, and it was designed to erase me. If you've ever had someone try to get you to sign something important when you were exhausted, distracted, or emotionally vulnerable, you know exactly how predatory that timing feels. Tell me, would you have refused immediately or pretended to consider it first? I already knew my answer. Pretend. Always pretend. Eric sat across from me with a carefully neutral expression. Hands folded, posture relaxed. He had changed into the crisp, button-down shirt, as if preparing for a business meeting rather than a conversation with his wife. "I know this looks formal," he said gently, tapping the pages, "but it's actually for your protection. Your protection." The words almost made me smile, because I had already read enough legal documents in my career to recognize manipulation wrapped in professional language. I picked up the agreement, slowly scanning the first page. Title Post, Natal Financial Stability Agreement. Even the name was deceptive. It sounded supportive, responsible, safe. But by paragraph 3, the real purpose became clear. The document proposed temporary financial separation, reallocation of shared liquidity, waiver of claims on certain pre-existing assets. I didn't need to read further to understand what it was. This wasn't about stability. It was about shielding, specifically shielding the money he had already moved and the assets he planned to protect. I kept my expression calm. "Why now?" I asked softly. Eric exhaled, as if relieved I wasn't reacting emotionally. "Because everything's changing," he replied. "We have a baby now. We need to simplify finances and reduce stress." Reduce stress. Another rehearsed phrase. He had clearly practiced this conversation. "What kind of assets are pre-existing?" I asked casually. He hesitated, only for half a second. But it was enough. "Just standard language," he said quickly. "It's nothing specific." That was a lie, because I knew exactly what it referred to. The Scottsdale property, the funds transferred from our joint account, and potentially any future income he planned to separate. Have you ever watched someone try to manipulate you while believing they sound reasonable? Did you confront them immediately or let them keep talking? I let him keep talking, because the more he explained, the clearer his intent became. "It's not permanent," he continued smoothly. "It just creates clarity while we adjust to parenthood." Adjust to parenthood. Not a word about separation. Not a word about Lena. Not a word about his legal consultations. He was still performing the illusion of partnership. That illusion was exactly what Rachel Moreno had warned me about. Maintain calm. Document everything. Allow the pattern to deepen. I flipped to page 9. There it was. Clause 9.2. The undersigned agrees to waive claim to funds transferred prior to execution of this agreement. My pulse slowed, because that single sentence confirmed everything. He wasn't just protecting future money. He was trying to legitimize the transfer he had already made. Retroactively, legally, if I signed this document, I would effectively confirm that the $47,500 he moved was no longer marital funds. That was his real objective, and he had timed it carefully. Postpartum, sleep-deprived, focused on the baby, exactly as his attorney notes had planned. I closed the document gently. "When do you need this signed?" I asked. Relief flashed across his face again. "Soon," he said. The lawyer suggested, "within a week." "Lawyer?" He said it casually, like it wasn't a major admission. But hearing him acknowledge legal involvement directly was another piece of documentation, another layer of intent. "I'll need to review it carefully," I replied calmly. His smile tightened slightly. "It's standard," he insisted. "You don't need to overthink it." Overthink. The word told me everything about how he viewed me. He believed I was emotional, distracted, inexperienced with legal nuance. He believed motherhood had weakened my ability to analyze. He was wrong. "I'd still like to read it thoroughly," I said softly. He nodded, though a faint tension appeared in his jaw. "Of course," he said. "Take your time." But I could see the calculation behind his eyes. He wanted it signed quickly, before I could seek outside advice, before I could realize its full implications, before anything disrupted his timeline. Later that night, after he fell asleep on the couch again, I took photos of every page. Then I sent them directly to Rachel Moreno. Her response came exactly 11 minutes later. 3 words: "Do not sign." Then a longer message followed. "This confirms financial shielding intent. Also suggests undisclosed third-party asset protection. We are now entering Phase 2. Phase 2, the phrase, sent a quiet chill through me, because Eric believed Phase 2 was his. But now there was another Phase 2, one he had never anticipated. Rachel's next message explained clearly. From this point forward, we begin controlled documentation of coercion attempts. Maintain composure. Do not refuse outright yet. Controlled documentation, which meant one thing. We needed him to push, to pressure, to reveal more. And he would, because people who rely on control always escalate when they feel it slipping. The next morning, Eric asked casually over breakfast, "Did you look over the agreement?" I met his gaze calmly. I said, "I have a few questions." His eyes flickered, not anger, concern, because questions meant delay. Delay meant risk. What questions, he asked carefully. I smiled faintly. Just some clarification about asset definitions. That was when his composure cracked for the first time. Just slightly, but enough for me to see it. Because in that moment, Eric realized something he hadn't expected. I wasn't confused. I wasn't overwhelmed. I wasn't compliant. I was paying attention. And that changed the dynamic completely. Later that afternoon, while feeding my son in the quiet nursery, my phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. I almost ignored it, but something made me answer. "Danielle Carter," a female voice asked. "Yes," I replied cautiously. There was a brief pause. Then she said a sentence that made my blood run cold. "My name is Lena Whitmore. We need to talk before Eric makes a mistake that will hurt all of us." 5 weeks after giving birth at exactly 3:17 p.m. on a quiet Wednesday afternoon, I sat in my parked car outside a Starbucks in Tempe, while the woman sleeping with my husband asked me if I was emotionally stable enough to handle the truth. She said it gently, almost kindly, like she was checking on a patient, not confronting the wife of the man she had been secretly planning a life with for months. That was the moment I realized something critical. Lena Whitmore did not see herself as the villain. She believed she was the rational one in this situation. If you've ever heard someone justify their betrayal as concern for you, you know how surreal that logic sounds. Tell me, which is worse, a person who lies openly or one who lies while believing they're helping you? I stayed very still in the driver's seat, phone pressed to my ear. My son was with a neighbor upstairs, the first time I had left him for more than an hour. I had arranged it deliberately, because when Lena called, I already knew one thing. This conversation was not an accident. It was a move, and moves require preparation. "I'm listening," I said calmly. There was a small exhale on the other end of the line relief. She had expected anger, or tears, or denial. Instead, she heard composure. That unsettled her. "I didn't want things to happen like this," she began carefully. "Eric and I never intended to hurt you." I almost admired the phrasing. Not "we didn't intend to betray you." Not "we didn't intend to deceive you." Just "we didn't intend to hurt you." As if pain was a side effect, not the result of deliberate actions. "When did it start?" I asked quietly. She hesitated. "About 8 months ago," she admitted. 8 months. I calculated instantly. That meant the affair had begun when I was only 1 month pregnant. Before we even told our families. Before we had heard our baby's heartbeat. Before Eric had painted the nursery walls. The timeline settled inside me like cold metal. "Why are you calling me now?" I asked. Another pause. Then she said something that revealed everything. "Because Eric is making this more complicated than it needs to be." Complicated. The word echoed in my mind. To her, my marriage, my child, my life was a complication, not something real, not something binding, just an obstacle delaying her future. "He's trying to handle it carefully," she continued. But his lawyer advised a smoother transition. Lawyer, so she knew. Of course she knew. She wasn't a passive participant. She was integrated into the plan. That realization confirmed something Rachel had suspected. This wasn't just an affair. It was a coordinated exit strategy. "I'm not trying to fight you," Lena added softly. "I just think it would be healthier if you accepted reality early." Accepted reality. I almost asked which reality she meant. The one where Eric used my inheritance to secure her house, or the one where he planned to question my mental stability to reduce custody exposure. Instead, I asked a simpler question. "What do you want from me?" She answered immediately. "I want you to sign the financial agreement," she said. There it was. Direct, practical, transactional. Because for Lena, this wasn't emotional. It was logistical. If I signed the funds Eric transferred would become legally insulated. The Scottsdale house would remain untouched. Their future would be secure, and I would be permanently weakened in any legal dispute. Have you ever noticed how betrayal often reveals itself most clearly when money is involved? Tell me, do you think people betray for love or for security? In this case, the answer was obvious. Security. "Why does it matter to you?" I asked calmly. Her response was honest, in a way that almost surprised me. "Because Eric said, if the agreement isn't signed, everything could become public, and that would damage all of us." Public. The word hung between us. Because suddenly, I understood something new. Lena wasn't afraid of me. She was afraid of exposure. Not morally, reputationally. "What exactly would become public?" I asked quietly. She hesitated longer this time. Then she said something that confirmed a critical piece of the puzzle. The financial timeline, the property purchase dates, the legal consultations. Every layer, every piece. She knew all of it, which meant she had been involved not just emotionally, but strategically. And that changed how I viewed her completely. She wasn't simply Eric's affair partner. She was his collaborator, his co-planner, his co-beneficiary. That realization settled something inside me permanently, because it meant one thing. There were no misunderstandings left in this situation, only competing strategies. "Lena," I said, calmly, "can I ask you one question?" "Of course," she replied. "Do you think Eric has told you everything?" Silence. Longer this time. Then her voice came back slightly uncertain. "What do you mean?" That small crack in her confidence told me something important. Eric had not shared everything with her. There were layers even she didn't know, which meant his control extended beyond me. He was managing multiple narratives simultaneously, just as Rachel had predicted. "I think you should ask him that question," I said quietly. Before she could respond, I added one more sentence. "And I think you should be careful about assuming you're protected." Then I ended the call. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't threaten. I didn't argue. I simply ended it. Because silence at the right moment creates more uncertainty than any confrontation. That evening, when Eric came home, something was different. He was tense, watchful. His eyes lingered on me longer than usual. "Everything okay today?" he asked casually. "Fine," I replied. He nodded slowly, but his gaze didn't leave my face. Because he sensed something had shifted. He just didn't know what. And uncertainty is the one thing control-oriented people fear most. Later that night, after he went to bed, I checked my phone. There was a new message from an unknown number. Not Lena, not Eric, a third person. The message contained only one line. "I think you deserve to see what he filed last week." Attached was a single document, a court submission draft, and the title at the top made my hands go completely still. "Petition for Emergency Custody Evaluation." 6 weeks after my son was born, at exactly 11:42 p.m. on a Sunday night, I opened a court document that showed my husband had already drafted a request to question my ability to keep our child. He hadn't filed it yet, but the form was complete. Every section filled, every claim carefully worded, and reading it felt like looking at a version of myself that existed only in his imagination. If you've ever discovered someone was quietly building a case against you while smiling at you every day, you know the kind of cold clarity that follows. Tell me, what would you feel first? Rage, fear, or something quieter? For me, it was neither rage nor fear. It was confirmation, because that document told me exactly how far Eric was willing to go. The title alone was chilling. Petition for Emergency Custody Evaluation. Under reason for request, he had written, concerns regarding postpartum emotional instability, affecting maternal decision-making and child safety. My hands didn't shake. I didn't cry. I simply kept reading, because working in escrow had taught me something important. Paper never lies about intent. It reveals it. The document outlined a narrative that was almost clinical in its cruelty. It described me as withdrawn, unpredictable, exhibiting emotional volatility following childbirth. There were even specific examples listed: extended periods of silence, avoidance of discussions regarding future planning, refusal to cooperate on financial stability agreements. Each line twisted reality into something else. My silence, which had been strategic control, was framed as instability. My refusal to sign a predatory document was framed as irresponsibility. It was meticulous, calculated, and deeply revealing, because it showed exactly how Eric planned to win custody leverage. Not through direct confrontation, through narrative manipulation. Have you ever realized that staying calm can be used against you just as easily as reacting emotionally? What would you do if someone tried to turn your composure into evidence against you? That question settled something final inside me, because now this was no longer about protecting money. It was about protecting truth itself. The document had one more detail that changed everything. At the bottom, under supporting witnesses, 2 names were listed. The first was expected, Lena Marie Whitmore. The second was not. It was Eric's own sister, Angela Carter. My stomach tightened. Angela had always been polite, neutral, never openly close to me, but never hostile either. Seeing her name there revealed something painful. Eric had already begun building alliances, quietly, systematically, which meant this wasn't just a legal strategy. It was a social one. He wasn't just preparing to challenge me in court. He was preparing to control how others perceived me. That realization was the moment I stopped thinking about defense. Because you cannot win a narrative battle by staying silent forever. Eventually, truth has to surface, and it has to surface publicly, not explosively, but undeniably. I closed the document and immediately forwarded it to Rachel Moreno. Her reply came in less than 4 minutes. This changes timing. A second message followed. We moved to Phase 3 preparation. Phase 3. The phrase sent a quiet, steady certainty through me, because this was the stage where silence became structure, preparation became action, and exposure became inevitable. Rachel called me directly a few minutes later. Her voice was calm but firm. This draft alone is extremely significant, she said. It proves premeditated narrative construction. What does that mean legally? I asked. It means if he files it, we can demonstrate bad faith intent. But more importantly, it gives us leverage to control when and how the truth emerges. Control. That word mattered because Eric believed he was controlling the timeline. But now, that control had shifted. Rachel explained carefully. We need 3 more components before exposure, she said. First, documentation of financial shielding attempts. Second, confirmation of coordinated witness planning. Third, proof of asset diversion using marital funds. I realized something as she spoke. We already had almost all of it. The bank transfers, the property documents, the legal consultation notes, the custody draft. The only missing piece was direct confirmation tying all layers together. And Rachel knew exactly how to obtain it. Do not confront him, she said again. Let him escalate. He will try to pressure you to sign the agreement. She paused. When he does, we document it. That was when I understood the final stage of his plan. Eric needed my signature. Without it, his financial shielding remained vulnerable. Without it, his narrative of cooperation weakened. Without it, his legal strategy lost its foundation, which meant one thing. He would push harder, soon, very soon. The next evening, confirmed it. Eric came home earlier than usual. He didn't sit on the couch. He didn't check his phone. He walked straight to the dining table, where the unsigned agreement still rested. His posture was tense, controlled, but urgent. "Danielle," he said carefully, "we need to finalize this tonight. Need, not want, not discuss, need." I looked at him calmly. "Why the urgency?" I asked. He hesitated. Then his composure slipped just slightly. "Because delays complicate everything," he replied. Complicate. That word again. He wasn't thinking about our marriage. He was thinking about timelines, legal windows, financial exposure. I met his gaze steadily. "I'm not signing tonight," I said quietly. For the first time since this began, something flashed openly across his face. Not anger, fear. Because in that moment, Eric realized something he hadn't anticipated. His timeline was slipping. And when people lose control of timing, they reveal more than they intend. Later that night, as I sat alone in the nursery, holding my sleeping son, my phone buzzed again. Another unknown number, another message, but this time, it wasn't a warning. It was a recording, an audio file, and the single line beneath it made my breath stop for just a second. "You should hear what Eric said when he thought no one was listening." 7 weeks after my son was born, at exactly 1:06 a.m. on a quiet Tuesday morning, I sat in the dark nursery, holding my phone while listening to my husband's voice calmly explain how he planned to phase me out of our child's life. He sounded relaxed, almost amused, like he was discussing a business transition, not the future of a family. That was the moment something inside me went completely still. Not numb, not broken, just final. If you've ever heard someone talk about you as if you were already gone, you know how deeply that kind of detachment cuts. Tell me, do you think betrayal hurts more when it's emotional or when it's delivered in a calm, practical tone, like a business decision? Because Eric's voice carried no anger, no hesitation, only calculation. I pressed play again to be sure I hadn't misunderstood. The recording began with background noise, clinking glasses, low music-muffled conversation. A restaurant. Then Lena's voice clear and familiar. "But are you sure she won't fight custody?" Eric chuckled softly. "She won't have the leverage," he replied. "Once the financial separation agreement is signed, she'll have limited resources, and the custody evaluation request will shift the narrative." Shift the narrative. He said it like a strategy bullet point, not like a father discussing the mother of his child. Lena's voice lowered slightly, and if she resists, Eric didn't hesitate. "Then we escalate documentation. Emotional instability is already noted. Postpartum cases are straightforward if presented correctly." My breathing slowed, not quickened, because in that moment, I felt something stronger than anger. Certainty. He had never been planning to co-parent. He had been planning to control. The recording continued. "What about public fallout?" Lena asked. Eric's answer was immediate. "It won't go public," he said confidently. "Most of this stays in family court. Quiet, controlled. That's the whole point. Quiet, controlled, hidden." That was his greatest assumption. That everything would remain private. That his narrative would never be challenged publicly. That no one would see the full pattern. Have you ever noticed how people who manipulate systems rely on secrecy more than anything else? What do you think scares them most? Confrontation or exposure? For Eric, the answer was clear. Exposure. Because exposure destroys narrative control. The recording ended with a final sentence that settled everything completely. Lena asked softly, "And you're sure she won't suspect anything?" Eric laughed quietly. "She trusts me. And right now, she's exhausted. Timing couldn't be better." Timing. Again, everything in his plan revolved around timing. But what he didn't know was this. Timing had already shifted, and he was now moving toward a moment he couldn't predict. I saved the recording in 3 separate secure locations. Then, I sent a copy directly to Rachel Moreno. Her reply came within minutes. This completes the evidentiary triangle. A second message followed. We now control exposure timing. Control. That word had changed sides completely. Because now we had financial documentation, legal preparation evidence, and direct audio confirmation of intent. Every layer aligned, every pattern undeniable. We had reached the stage where preparation transitioned into orchestration. Rachel called me shortly after. Her voice carried a tone I hadn't heard before. Not urgency, not caution, readiness. Danielle, she said calmly, from this point forward, we begin structuring public accountability. Public accountability. Not revenge, not retaliation. Accountability. She explained the strategy carefully. Eric's greatest vulnerability wasn't legal. It was reputational. His professional role depended heavily on trust. His social standing relied on image. And his extended family had no knowledge of his coordinated plan. Which meant one thing. When the truth surfaced, it would not be dismissed as a private dispute. It would be seen as a pattern. A deliberate, calculated pattern. But exposure needed the right moment. The right setting. A setting where denial would be impossible. A setting where witnesses were already present. A setting Eric could not easily escape. Rachel asked one simple question. When is the next major public family event? I thought for only a second. His parents' anniversary dinner, I said quietly. 2 weeks from now. Large gathering, extended family, close friends, business contacts. Rachel paused briefly, then said calmly, that will be the moment. The certainty in her voice sent a steady calm through me, because I understood immediately. This wasn't about creating drama. It was about creating clarity. A moment where truth could be presented in full context, where narrative manipulation would collapse under its own contradictions, and where Eric's carefully constructed image would face reality. Later that morning, Eric sat across from me at breakfast, watching me closely. He sensed something shifting. He just couldn't identify it. Have you thought more about the agreement? He asked carefully. I met his gaze calmly. Yes, I replied. A flicker of relief crossed his face. Good, he said, because we need to finalize things soon. Finalize. He still believed he was moving toward closure, toward control, toward the final stage of his plan. I nodded slightly. We'll discuss it at your parents' dinner, I said quietly. His eyes widened for just a fraction of a second. Why there? He asked. Because it's important to have clarity in front of family, I answered calmly. That was the moment the first real uncertainty appeared in his expression. Because something about that suggestion didn't align with his expectations. He had planned privacy, silence, controlled environments, not public clarity, but he couldn't object without revealing his own intentions. So he nodded slowly. Okay, he said cautiously. Later that afternoon, while organizing the baby's medical records, I received one final message from Rachel. It contained only a single sentence. Prepare yourself. Once exposure begins, denial will escalate rapidly. Denial. I knew exactly what she meant. Because people who build their lives on manipulation don't surrender quietly. They deny, they deflect, they play victims until the evidence becomes impossible to ignore. And when that moment comes, everything changes. 2 days later, while checking the mail, I found something unexpected. A certified letter addressed to me from Eric's attorney, and the first line inside revealed one last move I had not anticipated. Notice of intent to file emergency custody petition within 72 hours. 9 weeks after my son was born, at exactly 6:58 p.m. on a Saturday night, I walked into my in-laws' 40th anniversary dinner carrying a diaper bag, a sealed folder, and the calm certainty that my husband's entire plan was about to collapse in front of everyone who believed his version of reality. There were 47 guests in the room, family, close friends, 2 of Eric's business associates, and most importantly, people whose opinions shaped his reputation. He had no idea what was inside that folder. He believed the night would unfold exactly the way he expected. Polite speeches, family photos, a controlled conversation afterward, where he would pressure me to sign the agreement. Instead, it would become something else entirely. If you've ever walked into a room knowing you hold the truth, while everyone else believes a lie, you know how strangely quiet the world feels in that moment. Tell me, would you feel fear or would you feel clarity? I felt clarity, because by then, there was nothing left to discover, only to reveal. Eric greeted me at the entrance, smiling for appearances, his hand lightly touching my back, as if we were still a united couple. "You look tired," he whispered quietly, concerned, sympathetic. "Performing." "I'm fine," I replied. He studied my face for a moment, sensing something beneath the calm, but he couldn't identify it. Because composure looks identical to compliance until the moment it isn't. We took our seats at the long banquet table. His parents sat at the center, his mother beaming, his father already emotional. Dinner began normally. Champagne toasts, stories about their marriage, laughter echoing through the room. Eric relaxed visibly as the evening progressed, because nothing seemed out of place. Nothing seemed threatening. He believed his world remained intact. That belief would last exactly 12 more minutes. At 8:21 p.m., after his father finished a speech about loyalty and trust, I stood up. The room quieted politely. Eric's head turned toward me, slightly surprised. He expected a thank you toast, a sentimental message, something supportive. Instead, I spoke calmly. "I'd like to say something about family," I said. My voice was steady, not loud, not emotional, just clear enough to carry across the room. Eric's posture stiffened slightly, because something in my tone didn't match the expected script. "Family," I continued, "is built on trust, transparency, and protection, especially when a child is involved." Several guests nodded. His mother smiled warmly, still unaware. Then I opened the folder. The soft sound of paper sliding echoed louder than it should have in the quiet room, and I said the sentence that shifted everything. 2 months ago, while I was 9 months pregnant, Eric transferred $47,500 from our joint account without my knowledge. Silence fell instantly, heavy, total. Eric's face went pale. He hadn't expected specifics. He hadn't expected numbers. He hadn't expected timing. And most importantly, he hadn't expected witnesses. "What are you doing?" he whispered sharply. But I continued calmly. "Those funds were used to secure a property in Scottsdale, co-purchased with Lena Whitmore." Gasps rippled across the table. Eric's mother's smile disappeared. His father leaned forward slowly. Eric's first reaction arrived exactly as Rachel predicted. Denial. "That's not true," he said quickly. "This is a misunderstanding." His voice was controlled, but tight, because he knew denial was his only immediate defense. I placed the property disclosure form on the table. Date visible, names visible, numbers undeniable. "This is the loan application," I said calmly. Eric's breathing quickened. His eyes darted around the room, calculating, searching for allies, for support, for control. But the room had already shifted. Because facts don't sound like accusations. They sound like documentation. His denial moved to the second stage. Deflection. "You're taking things out of context," he said sharply. This was a business investment opportunity. Business. Opportunity. He was trying to reposition the narrative, but the pattern was already too clear. "Then why did you draft a separation timeline before our son was born?" I asked quietly. I placed the printed timeline on the table. His mother covered her mouth. His father's face hardened. Eric's composure cracked visibly now, because the narrative was slipping beyond recovery. His voice rose slightly. "I was trying to protect us financially," he insisted. That was the third stage, justification, framing betrayal as responsibility. But the most devastating moment hadn't arrived yet. I looked directly at him. Then I said the sentence that changed the room completely. "And why did you prepare a custody petition claiming I'm emotionally unstable?" The room froze, not shocked, stunned, because now the issue wasn't marriage. It was a child. I placed the draft custody petition on the table. Eric's father stood up abruptly. "Is this real?" he demanded. Eric opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. No words came, because for the first time, he had no narrative left. His denial shifted into the final stage Rachel predicted. Victimhood. "You don't understand," he said desperately, voice cracking. "I was under pressure. Lena pushed me. I was trying to keep peace. Blame shifting, rewriting, but it was too late. Because then I pressed play on my phone." Eric's own voice filled the silent room. "Once the agreement is signed, she'll have limited resources. Postpartum cases are straightforward if presented correctly. She trusts me. Timing couldn't be better." The recording ended, and with it, Eric's control ended. The silence that followed wasn't chaotic. It wasn't loud. It was something much heavier. Recognition, because everyone in that room now understood exactly what had happened. Eric didn't collapse dramatically. He didn't shout. He simply sat down slowly, like a man who had just watched his own reflection shatter. And for the first time since this began, he looked at me without performance, only realization. But the evening wasn't over yet, because as the room struggled to process what they had just heard, a voice spoke from the doorway. Calm, firm, unexpected. "I think there's one more thing everyone should see." I turned, and standing there was Lena Whitmore, holding a stack of documents Eric clearly never intended anyone else to see. At exactly 8:37 p.m., with 47 stunned guests still frozen around the anniversary dinner table, Lena Whitmore stepped fully into the room and placed a stack of documents beside my folder without even looking at Eric. She looked at me instead, and in that moment, I realized something had shifted that Eric had never planned for. He had lost control of every narrative at once. If you've ever watched someone's entire strategy collapse not because of one enemy, but because the people they relied on stopped protecting them, you know how final that kind of silence feels. Tell me, do you think betrayal hurts more when it's exposed publicly, or when the people who enabled it finally step away? For Eric, both were happening simultaneously. He stood halfway from his chair. "Lena, don't," he said sharply. It wasn't a request. It was an instinctive command, the voice of someone used to managing outcomes. But Lena didn't stop. She placed the papers flat on the table, and her tone was calm, not emotional, not angry, just finished. "You told me this was contained," she said quietly. "You told me everything was transparent." Her words weren't directed at me. They were directed at him. Because at that moment, Lena wasn't defending herself. She was distancing herself. From him, from the plan, from the fallout. Eric's face drained of color. "Lena, this isn't the time," he whispered urgently. But she ignored him. She turned to Eric's parents first. "These are the emails between Eric and his attorney," she said simply. She slid the top document forward. Eric's father picked it up. His hands trembled slightly as he read. The room remained utterly silent, because everyone understood instinctively whatever was in those pages would determine whether Eric's story still had any ground left. It didn't. The first email was dated 4 months before our son was born. Subject line: custody positioning strategy. Eric's father's jaw tightened as he read aloud the first sentence unintentionally. "Client seeks maximum custodial leverage while minimizing financial exposure." He stopped reading because he didn't need to continue. Everyone in that room understood exactly what it meant. Eric had not been reacting to circumstances. He had been planning to dominate them. His denial was gone now. There was nothing left to deny. His next response came in the only form remaining: desperation. "This is private legal communication," he said, voice unsteady. "You can't just—" Lena cut him off quietly. "You told me to keep copies," she said. "You said documentation protects everyone." Her words landed with devastating simplicity, because they revealed something crucial. Eric's own obsession with control and documentation had created the evidence now destroying him. He sank back into his chair slowly. not arguing, not protesting, just shrinking. Because for the first time, there was no narrative left for him to manage, no ally left to support him, no timing advantage left to exploit. His mother finally spoke. Her voice was barely above a whisper. Why, she asked. Not angrily, not dramatically, just broken. Eric opened his mouth, closed it, then finally said the only truth he had left. I didn't want to lose everything, he murmured. That sentence revealed more than any denial ever could, because it confirmed the core of everything. This had never been about love. It had been about control, assets, image, risk management. He hadn't feared losing his marriage. He had feared losing leverage. And in trying to preserve that leverage, he had lost something far greater. His father placed the documents down slowly, then looked at him with a steady, cold disappointment. You already lost everything, he said quietly. There was no anger in his voice, only finality. Eric didn't respond, because he knew it was true. Have you ever seen someone realize too late that the thing they tried hardest to control was the very thing that exposed them? What do you think hurts more, losing the plan or losing the respect of the people who believed in you? For Eric, the answer was visible in his posture. He wasn't looking at me anymore. He wasn't looking at Lena. He was staring at the table, at the evidence, at the reality he could no longer reshape. Rachel Moreno, who had quietly entered the room during Lena's reveal, stepped forward calmly. Her presence alone shifted the energy again. Professional, measured, unavoidable. Mr. Carter, she said evenly, given the documentation presented tonight, any attempt to file an emergency custody petition will be met with immediate counteraction. Eric looked up slowly, not defiant, not combative, just exhausted, because he understood what that meant. The legal advantage he believed he held was gone, completely. Rachel continued calmly. And regarding the financial transfers, we will be filing preservation notices and forensic accounting requests first thing Monday morning. Every word was precise, final, controlled, exactly the opposite of how Eric's plan had been structured. For the first time since this began, he looked directly at me. Not with manipulation, not with charm, just with a hollow recognition. I never thought you'd do this publicly, he said quietly. And I answered with the truth. You planned everything, assuming I'd stay silent. My voice didn't rise. It didn't shake. It didn't accuse. It simply stated reality. And you were wrong. That was the moment his last defense collapsed, because silence had always been the foundation of his strategy. And once that silence ended, everything ended with it. No shouting followed, no dramatic exit, just a long, heavy quiet as reality settled over the room. Eventually, guests began to leave quietly, not gossiping, not speculating, just absorbing, because what they had witnessed wasn't scandal. It was exposure, and exposure changes how people see someone permanently. As the room emptied, Lena approached me slowly. I didn't know about the custody petition, she said quietly. I thought this was only financial. I met her gaze calmly. I know, I replied, because by then I did. Eric had been managing even her, controlling her information the same way he had tried to control mine. That was his final mistake, because when you try to control everyone, eventually no one trusts you. As the last guest left, Eric remained seated alone at the table, not speaking, not moving, just sitting with the reality he had built for himself. And in that quiet moment, I realized something unexpected. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel triumph. I felt something much simpler, relief. But the story wasn't fully over yet, because consequences don't arrive in a single night. They unfold in the days that follow. And 3 mornings later, as I sat in a family court waiting room holding my son, my phone buzzed with a notification that marked the final shift. Emergency custody petition, withdrawn by petitioner. 3 months after the anniversary dinner, at exactly 6:32 a.m. on a quiet autumn morning, I sat on a wooden bench at a small park in Phoenix, watching my son take his first unsteady steps across the grass. He took 4 steps, stopped, then laughed a bright, surprised sound that carried in the cool air. That was the moment I realized something simple and final. The most powerful form of justice isn't watching someone fall. It's realizing they no longer have any control over your life. If you've ever walked away from a situation that once felt overwhelming, you know that calm feeling that arrives afterward. Tell me, do you think closure comes from revenge or from peace? For me, it came from peace, because everything that followed the exposure had unfolded quietly, steadily, and exactly as Rachel predicted. Eric withdrew the emergency custody petition within 72 hours. Not voluntarily, but because the evidence of premeditated narrative manipulation made it legally unsustainable. The court records reflected it clearly. Petitioner withdraws motion without prejudice. A neutral phrase, but one that carried unmistakable meaning. His strategy had collapsed before it even began. The forensic accounting process revealed the full financial pattern within weeks. The $47,500 transfer, the attempted shielding through the post-natal agreement, the Scottsdale property purchase using marital funds, every layer documented, every timeline aligned. In the end, the financial settlement wasn't dramatic. It was precise. The court ordered full restoration of transferred funds to marital asset status, equal division of the Scottsdale property's equity, primary physical custody awarded to me with structured visitation for Eric, not because he was declared unfit, but because the court recognized a documented pattern of bad faith custodial positioning. The legal language was calm, clinical, almost unemotional, which made it more powerful. Because truth doesn't need dramatic wording. It only needs clarity. Have you ever noticed how the most satisfying outcomes aren't explosive? They're quiet and undeniable. What kind of ending would feel most peaceful to you? For me, peace arrived in the smallest moments, like watching my son sleep without feeling anxious, like checking my bank account and knowing every dollar reflected stability, not manipulation, like receiving a court order that set clear, enforceable boundaries. And boundaries, I learned, are the real form of closure. Eric didn't disappear. He still had visitation rights. He still saw our son twice a week. But something fundamental had changed. He no longer controlled timing. He no longer controlled narrative. And most importantly, he no longer controlled me. The first time we met at a supervised exchange location after the settlement, he looked different. Quieter, less certain. Not defeated, but no longer dominant. He handed our son back to me after a short visit and said something unexpected. "I underestimated you," he admitted. There was no bitterness in his voice, just recognition. I didn't respond emotionally. I simply nodded, because by then I understood something clearly. Acknowledgement is not reconciliation, and forgiveness is not the same as access. So I maintained the boundary. Calm, consistent, non-negotiable. Lena moved into the Scottsdale house alone. She and Eric did not remain together long, not because of public backlash, but because, as she reportedly told a mutual acquaintance later, "You can't build trust with someone who plans everything in secret." That sentence stayed with me because it captured the entire truth in one line. You cannot build stability on manipulation. Eventually, Eric's professional reputation also shifted. Not dramatically, not publicly, but quietly. Opportunities narrowed. Partnerships became cautious. Because in business, just like in relationships, trust is everything. And once trust fractures, it rarely fully returns. But none of that mattered to me anymore, because my focus had shifted completely from reacting to his actions to building my own stability. I returned to work gradually, rebuilt my routines, created a life structured around clarity and calm. The biggest change wasn't external. It was internal. I no longer questioned my instincts. I no longer ignored small inconsistencies. And most importantly, I no longer believed that silence meant weakness, because silence used correctly had been my greatest strength. One afternoon, months later, My son toddled across the living room and fell gently against my legs, laughing. I lifted him easily, holding him close, and in that simple moment, I understood the final lesson this entire experience had taught me. Control is temporary, truth is permanent, and peace comes not from winning against someone, but from no longer needing to fight at all. If you've made it this far in the story, I want to ask you something. What do you think was the biggest turning point? The moment I discovered the transfer, the decision to stay silent, or the choice to reveal everything publicly? Tell me in the comments, because every story of betrayal has that one moment where everything changes. And if this story resonated with you, take a second to like and subscribe, because there are more stories ahead, stories about hidden truths, quiet strength, and the unexpected ways justice can unfold. The next one begins with a locked safe, a missing will, and a sister who thought no one would ever question her version of the past. But that, as always, is another story.